Good morning. I do hope that you're well, and it's really good to have this opportunity to worship God again today, isn't it? On this Sunday, the 11th. And I'm really delighted to have just a few minutes with you this morning just to read the scriptures and share a short reflection on our gospel passage. This morning, our reading is taken from Mark. We stay with the Gospel of Mark, this time chapter 6. Reading verse 14 through 29. The death of John the Baptist. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others said, it is Elijah. And others said, it is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him, and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers, and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter, Herodias, came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me whatever you wish, and I will give it. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved. Yet, out of regard for his oath and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When the disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. This week, inserted between the sending out of the 12 disciples for mission that we heard about last week and their return, which we will note next week, Mark gives us this painful story about the death of John the Baptist. Perhaps it is also a story that provokes us to think about who influences us and who we listen to and what governs our actions. As we will have noticed, Mark tells this story in a very different way to his usual pace and style. It is very light on his favoured and then immediately approach. The story is longer than many of his others, and he tells it retrospectively. It begins with Herod's guilty conscience. In fact, it looks as though just the mention of Jesus' remarkable ministry causes Herod to think that John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. It looks as though in Herod's troubled mind, at least, there is no escape from John. We then hear a complex backstory of self-interest, violence and abuse. It is a clash of spiritual and temporal power, but in this clash there is a pervasive and destructive evil. Herod is manipulated into an execution because Herodias is determined to destroy John the Baptist. Certainly she didn't want his questions concerning the legitimacy of her place in the palace to continue to hang over her. Herod comes across pretty poorly, doesn't he? As one commentator explains, Herod comes across as weak and vacillating. He was indecisive when listening to John's preaching, pig-headed when it came to keeping a rashly made vow. He comes across as the victim of his own whims and feelings rather than someone who makes decisions based on principles or values. Many other manuscripts also have Herodias' daughter as Herodias, although the Jewish historian Josephus names her daughter Salome. Salome's role has been interpreted in different ways, sometimes in ways which are unbecoming and perhaps unfair. While yes, she does decide to play her part in her mother's plot, it may be more just to perceive her as the victim of her mother and her stepfather, who is also her uncle. So, as I mentioned at the start of the service, and as we are all aware, this is indeed a difficult story, but perhaps we can still glean some wisdom and suggest some questions for further reflection from this story. Here are a couple of thoughts. As we think about Herod, we find someone who is the exact opposite of a mature and measured person. Ruled by his desire of the moment, he makes a grand gesture, promising up to half his kingdom, and then he is too proud or too fragile to admit that this vow was a terrible mistake. He goes through with having John executed just because he does not want to look weak in front of his guests. We find here a narcissistic man who lives out his fragile ego. Perhaps here there is a reminder for us to continually grow in self-awareness and wisdom and maturity as people, as disciples. How can we live well with others in mind? How can we grow and be ever more able to act on our values and less on ego? As I close, as Reverend Dr. Dick France observes, we are left pondering on the nature of a world where evil can so openly triumph, and where virtue and courage, and even the call of God to a prophetic ministry, are no protection against petty self-interest in high places. We are reminded this week of what the true cost can be for those who do get the opportunity to challenge the powerful face to face. And even today, there may be a cost to being prophetic and standing up and speaking out about what is just and right and fair and honourable. True, it may not result in death, but it could lead to criticism and censure, and in some places worse. Even so, shall we not still stand ready to speak truth to power whenever we have the opportunity to do so, whether that be as individuals or along with others? Of course, at the same time, we seek to be prophetic. We do not wish to be or be perceived as being superior or self-righteous. Perhaps this is why Jesus taught humility and love, to inspire us as we seek to speak and act proportionately and aim to maintain motives that are sincere and true. Amen. God bless you. If you're continuing with the service now, it's now time to sing our next hymn, which is Take My Life and Let It Be, Rejoice and Sing 371. The full video with the whole service that has taken place in the sanctuary will be available just a little later on, and Rob will email that round as usual as soon as it's ready. Take care, goodbye, and I look forward to sharing with you again next week.